In round 6 of the London Chess Classic, Hikaru Nakamura was blown off the board by Fabiano Caruana in a really sharp Najdorf Sicilian. In the very next round, in round 7, Nakamura repeated the exact same line, except this time with the white pieces, and he was playing against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, arguably the greatest Najdorf expert in the world. Well, was this brave or was this foolish? I mean, for me, this was an extraordinary decision of Nakamura to repeat this line, even though it's with colours reversed, because somehow I felt that it's put enormous psychological pressure on himself, because somehow if you lost twice with this variation, even with colours reversed, you know, doesn't look too clever. Nevertheless, we know that Hikaru is, you know, really up for a fight, and you know, the fact that this variation is so sharp really suited him, perhaps, well, clearly. So here is the position after 13 moves, and Hikaru the day before had played g5. Now, strangely enough, this was a move that Vachier-Lagrave had played earlier in the year against Anish Giri and won a beautiful game. It's from Norway Chess. But after precisely 5 seconds, Bishop b7 was played, deviating from that game. So Maxime had come armed to the teeth. So here we go, and both players playing really quickly at this point. And rook c8, so this looks all very, very normal. Putting pressure on the c-file. King b1, and now came g5, this typical Najdorf break. You know, if black doesn't break out, doesn't try to claim squares in the centre, then of course, you know, if white can get in h4 and g5 and push black backwards, then this is very good. So somehow black needs to break free, and g5 is the typical way of doing this in the Najdorf. So what you're trying to do is undermine white's control over the f4 squares. So if this is taken, for example, then black's knight will claim the e5 square, and then that gives black this kind of central shell in which to play around. Now f5 has been played here previously, but somehow that doesn't look too terrifying. I mean, possibly e5, you might even be able to play knight e5 and then protect the e-pawn, but e5 is probably quite safe. But after not too long, Nakamura played queen h3. Now this is a new move in the position, and this looks very sensible. First of all, you bring the queen away from this diagonal, away from the bishop, so e5 possibly comes into play. You also put pressure on the h-file, so that, you know, after a move like g takes f4, then g5 is actually very strong, exploiting this pin, and then that pawn goes all the way to g6, and this is fantastic. Once you undermine the support of the e6 pawn, then black's position often collapses. So that's the rationale behind queen h3, and I think a very, very strong move. Probably the best move is to play knight h7 here, which looks extremely passive, but it does sort of hold up black's position. And then, you know, if f5, then e5, and if the knight goes back, then somehow black has a bit of security there. But I mean, there are other moves. e5 is possible here, and I mean, it's just fantastically complicated. Maxime thought for 26 minutes in this position, 26 minutes, and came up with knight c5. So clearly he was on his own at this point. So attacking e4, and then rook he1. And once again, if g takes f4 here, then g5, and the knight goes back, and g6, and this just undermines the e6 square, and that's that. After 21 minutes, Vachier-Lagrave played h5. An extraordinary move. I mean, basically, you know, if white takes here, then you can take on g4, and you've got to that e5 square, so black has stability there. But after 23 minutes, so long thinks for both players, Nakamura played knight f5, and here the fun really starts. So this is completely chaotic position, so many captures available. First of all, we should have a look at what happens if the knight is taken. So e takes f5 and now ef5, and you can see this opens up the e-file. Black's problem here is that his king simply doesn't have a safe place to head for. Centre is open, kingside is obviously completely fluid. You can't castle queenside. It reminds me of positions from the Velimirovich attack in the Sozin variation, if that makes sense to anybody, where white often played this sacrifice as well, and this looks absolutely tremendous. I can't possibly attempt a comprehensive analysis of this game. It's so complicated, but let me point out a few attractive variations at the very least. So, for example, after pawn takes pawn, if black can get a foothold in the centre, then of course it could be okay here. But bishop takes knight is an interesting idea. And if pawn takes, then knight d5. This is such a beautiful picture. I just have to show this. And here, of course, because of all the threats, black has to capture. And then this is just completely crushing. Other captures are possible, but it's similarly devastating. Or in this position, after g takes f4, bishop takes knight. If queen takes, okay, this is trickier, but after this, e5 is a very strong move, opening up the line of the bishop and attacking here. And this should be very good for white. So, the game. Maxime took on e4. So, exploiting the slight weakness here. This was taken, and then bishop d4. So, very nice move. Attacking here, but also defending the knight on c3. And, white has such good coordination here. And now the bishop's taken. Now you can't play queen takes because the knight is on, so you have to play king takes, and g takes h5, and suddenly white has a new asset. He can advance the h-pawn. So g takes f4. Now here, I thought after the check that a very simple way forward would just be to take the pawn on f4, and to me this looked absolutely crushing. But Hikaru thought for over 20 minutes in this position, played something else. In fact, it's not completely clear. I thought this was just going to be the end. Something like this. And it seemed to me that white's pieces were just too strong. But black does have ways to try and complicate the position, like this. And, well, anyway, it's very, very complicated, but black can possibly try to defend that position. Instead, Hikaru came up with a very interesting idea. By the way, the engines suggest that h6, h7, and here an extraordinary move, king a1. The point is to simply threaten knight takes e4 without allowing this check, and this does appear to be devastating, because if pawn takes bishop, then of course there's going to be a check here, and then the e-file opens, and yeah, that's completely winning for white. That's the engine suggestion. Hikaru played king a1 immediately. It's also incredibly strong, and it's a beautiful idea, very similar to this computer move. Again, the idea is that you want to threaten to take on e4 without allowing this check, and then white carries on with the attack. And there's no decent defense here. For example, black would love to play e5, but then we take, and if pawn takes bishop, then queen f6, and this is just completely crushing. The king just isn't going to escape here. Terrible So Maxime came up with a very clever idea, and we've seen this over the past couple of days. B4. First, this looks very odd, very strange. But let me show you the idea. If pawn takes, then e5, and now if this is taken, then black, because he's managed to open up the A file in this particular variation, can force a draw by perpetual. Now, of course, that's not absolutely forced, but I just want to demonstrate what the idea is. Very, very clever. So back to b4. Hikaru took immediately. So at the moment, black is a piece down, but he has at least got a little bit of counterplay. And, starting to open up white's king, and so white has to be very careful. But I mean, Hikaru had said he'd seen this position, before he played king a1, and was basically sure he was winning, and his judgment was absolutely correct. And the point of taking on f4 is that after pawn takes pawn, the queen covers a4, obviously preventing queen a4 check. And so now it's white's turn to bat, basically, and time to come back to black's king. Rook g5 played by Vachier-Lagrave. Tricky. So obviously if that's taken, then there's a draw by perpetual check again. So still not completely clear. Well, it is clear actually, after check. And then rook g1. Very nice move. Check, and bishop a3. And here's a very funny moment. The Frenchman took on g1. He could have tried this extraordinary move, king h7. And if rook takes rook here, then black has rook d8. I mean, this is an incredible tactic. And if queen takes rook, queen a3, and that's perpetual check along here, along these squares. That's not forced. There are, after king h7, of course, there are various ways to win. For example, queen check. And then let's say rook d2, and this covers everything. And it's not the only way to win, but so what I'm saying is king h7 would not have saved black. Instead, rook takes rook was played, check, and now this is forced mate. If the king goes back, then you can play queen here, threatening this, and if check, then bishop b2. Nasty, and if king h6, this is the game continuation. Rook g6 is of course very attractive. The rook comes back, threat, queen h7 mate, f5 stops that, and now queen f3 is a very nice way to finish off. So queen h3 immediately would have allowed queen h4, but after the check, if the king goes back, then that's mate, and if the king comes forward, then we'll play check and queen g5 mate. Very efficient calculation at the end. So what a brave game by Hikaru Nakamura. After this terrible loss yesterday against Caruana, he's struck back in emphatic manner. Great calculation, really daring sacrifices, and well, typical of the guy. He's not afraid of a scrap. So, with just 2 rounds to go, Wesley So is out in the lead with 5 out of 7. Fabiano Caruana 4.5 out of 7 in second, and then 2 players, Vladimir Kramnik and Hikaru Nakamura, on 4 out of 7. We still have Wesley So to play against Fabiano Caruana.